Gemini 18, two Chinese men talking Chinese. All around the world in major cities we have Chinatowns. And this is indicative of a inclination that we all have to seek out our own kind. If you imagine a Chinese person emigrating to a foreign country, it must be so scary. Nobody really understands you, nobody speaks your language, nobody really approves of you, of the other nation. They respond against you. We've all got a little bit of xenophobia. We're all afraid of strangers, and that's actually not a bad thing in the context of the old way of being, where a stranger in a tribe, coming to a new tribe, is looked at rather warily. We don't know whether strangers are good for us. It's a very good idea to be cautious of strangers. We just don't know what they want. We have to give them time to show themselves, to be able to reconcile with our ways of being and to be safe to be with. So the Chinese answered this problem by looking for other Chinese people, as we would do if we went to a foreign country and we found somebody of our own nationality. We would be drawn to speak to them. It's very natural. It goes too far when xenophobia turns into prejudice, when we prejudge someone as being necessarily bad because they've got a different skin color or way of speech, and so on. So prejudice is one thing, but caution is quite another. And I remember once I was on the road for a very long time in Turkey, actually, and it was winter. There was nobody else to speak to. I hadn't spoken my own language for weeks on end. And I overheard a woman in a bar speaking English, and I went up to her and I said, "Do you mind if I talk to you, please?" And it was really clearly I wasn't coming on to her. I just wanted to speak English. I felt so lost, really, because I couldn't speak my own language. So take this metaphor into the way we are as on the leading edge of spiritual discovery. Anyone who's actually studying astrology with a spiritual aspect in mind is a very unusual person compared to the mainstream. We speak a different language, and we even speak a different language from mainstream astrologers, if there is such a term. Astrology has come out of a time when it was first not understood to be related to personality. A long time ago, if you had your horoscope read, if you were wealthy enough to do that, the astrologer would cast the birth chart of the king of the nation, because the king was so influential that what the mood of the king was more important than what your own circumstances were. I don't know whether that's true or not. I came across that story once. It's a very interesting idea. And the development of self really is a phenomenon that took place. We can see in the period around the Renaissance, it changed. About 500 years ago, people started to become aware of themselves as having a unique importance. And the Theosophists, about 1890 or so, started to really examine the relationship between astrology and the whole cosmos, to make sure that astrologers understood that our art was grounded in mathematics and so on. And the Theosophists went out of their way to prove that every single thing in physical reality was matched and married within astrology. And it was very intelligent. The Theosophists were super bright, super intelligent writers. I can't understand any of them, maybe apart from Rudhyar. And then Jung got involved, and Jung was possibly the leading astrologer of the 20th century. Even though nobody knew he was an astrologer, he has had more influence on the development of astrology than anyone else, I think, in the 20th century, even compared to people like Rudhyar and Jones, whose astrology was excellent, but whose reach was limited. Whereas Jung became a popular figure to inspire everyone working in many a field, including psychology, but including astrology, which is the point. Now, psychology doesn't do everything that we need done to us to make us feel good and happy. Psychology really only examines the problems and helps us to identify a way to resolve the problems or maybe avoid them. My profound interest is in the spiritual question, and the idea of introducing a spiritual dimension to astrology is not that popular, actually. So we can see that astrology has many, many different cycles and purposes and an evolution to itself. And what we're talking about here is that the number of us who are also interested in the spirituality within astrology, we're in a minority. And we've developed our own way of speaking about our interest and our purposes within astrology, which differs from other astrologers. It most certainly differs from the mainstream. And we can expand this idea to any spiritual seeker, really, whether you're using tarot or Enneagram or NLP or Myers-Briggs to understand the philosophical, psychological, spiritual questions in life. However widely you want to see that, nevertheless, we're still in a minority. And those who are really at the leading edge of this, who will not accept old teachings if they don't check out, or popular teachings if they just lack the depth, those of us who refuse all of that and are just looking to see what we can come up with to somehow give words to our yearning for spiritual clarity and spiritual inspiration, those of us, we tend towards meeting up together. We tend towards each other to look for a rapport, an empathy, willingness to listen and be understood, to understand the other, to go through that process of moving away from the language that just doesn't work for us into the language that does. So these two Chinese men talking are speaking in a language that cannot be understood by the mainstream. And because they're so rare in the foreign lands, they're seeking solitude, in a sense, from the mainstream. But that solitude can become loneliness and lack of ability to move forward, to evolve, because you've got no one to talk to. You can't evolve your ideas. So there's a whole sense of spiritual seekers having a solitary existence, which can sometimes turn into loneliness, and for us to find a way to meet up and be, in a sense, able to offer the supportive, emotional understanding of fellowship. And that's hard to win in a harsh society. So we need to look for it. We need to go somewhere where we can find like-minded people. And now online it's a lot easier than it once was. So perhaps it's not such a problem, as long as you can overcome the inherent shallowness of an online conversation. It's easier now with video meetings, obviously, because you can see facial gestures. But we can't actually smell someone on Zoom. And I know that sounds a very strange thing to say, but I rather suspect that smell is an important aspect of rapport when you're with somebody, and you can learn a lot of information from this on an unconscious level. And there's not also the same tone of voice. It gets distorted electronically. And there are some subtle languaging and communication clues lost in our electronic world. So it is good to actually meet face to face sometimes with someone who can get you. And in Christianity, it is known, Jesus spoke of this, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am there. In other words, you have to meet someone to bring down Christ consciousness. And I don't think he meant on Zoom, for obvious reasons. Of course, the other side of this is that you can't hang out with people that are going to actually move you away from who you are. To discover who you are, you need to spend time with like-minded people. That's what we're discussing. But to spend time with wrong-minded people is as important to avoid, because you become whomever you spend your time with to some extent. You take on their thoughts, you take on their atmosphere, you take on their style of being unconsciously, and we can't guard against it. So we have to be very careful who we spend our time with.